The thunder of hooves echoed across the dusty plains as Vincent Porter rode into Bodie, California. His hands gripping the reins so tightly his knuckles turned white, not from determination, but to hide the trembling that had plagued him since the war. The year was 1879, and the mining boomtown sprawled before him like an open wound on the landscape, raw and festering with saloons, brothels, and the desperate dreams of those seeking fortune in the unforgiving West. Vincent dismounted with practiced care, ensuring his boots hit the ground firmly before releasing the saddle horn. His fingers betrayed him nonetheless, shaking visibly as he looped the reins around the hitching post outside the town's general store. He pulled his hat lower, shadowing eyes that had seen too much and a face that hadn't smiled in years. "You planning on standing there all day, mister?" A woman's voice, clear as a bell and just as commanding, cut through his thoughts. Vincent turned slowly, his gaze landing on a woman with copper hair pulled back in a practical bun, freckles scattered across sun-kissed skin. She stood in the doorway of the general store, arms crossed over a simple blue dress that had seen better days. "No, madam," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. "Just catching my breath." "Well, catch it inside if you're buying something. Dust storm's coming." She nodded toward the horizon where dark clouds gathered. Vincent followed her into the store, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. The interior was neat but crowded with goods, barrels of flour and sugar, shelves of canned goods, tools hanging from hooks along the walls. The woman moved behind the counter with graceful efficiency. "Name's Lillian O'Hara," she said, straightening a display of tobacco. "Just took over the store after my father passed. What can I help you with, Vincent Porter?" he replied, eyes scanning the shelves. "Need some supplies, planning to stay a while." "Everyone's planning to stay a while in Bodie," Lillian remarked dryly. "Until they're not. What brings you here?" "Gold, or running from something." Vincent's hands twitched at his sides. "Work. I'm good with horses." Lillian's gaze dropped to his trembling fingers, then back to his face. Something in her expression shifted, not pity but understanding. "Mac Gregor at the livery might be looking for help," she said, her voice softer now. "He's getting on in years. Can't handle the wilder ones anymore." Vincent nodded, grateful she didn't ask about his hands. Obliged for the information. As he gathered his supplies, coffee, beans, bacon, ammunition, he felt her eyes on him. Not judging, just observing. When he placed his items on the counter, his hands betrayed him again, sending a tin of coffee clattering to the floor. "Damn it," he muttered, dropping to one knee to retrieve it. Lillian crouched beside him, her hand reaching the tin first. "It happens," she said simply, placing it on the counter. Their fingers brushed momentarily, and Vincent felt a jolt that had nothing to do with his affliction. "How much do I owe you?" he asked, straightening. Lillian tallied his purchases. $2.43. Vincent reached into his pocket, his fingers fumbling with the coins. Frustration built in his chest as he struggled to separate the correct amount. Without a word, Lillian placed her hand under his, steadying it. "Then I'll hold you steady," she said, so matter-of-factly that Vincent almost missed the profound offer in her words. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Vincent saw something that had become foreign to him: acceptance. Not of who he had been or what he had done, but of who he was now, broken pieces and all. The moment passed quickly as the door swung open, bringing in a gust of wind and a burly man with a star pinned to his chest. "Afternoon, Lily," the sheriff said, nodding to her before turning suspicious eyes on Vincent. "New in town. Just arrived," Vincent answered, straightening to his full height. "Sheriff Thomas Daniels," the man said, extending his hand. Vincent hesitated, then accepted the handshake, willing his hand not to tremble. He failed. The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly. Porter's the name, right? Heard you talking as I came in. That's right. What brings you to Bodie, looking for work with horses? Sheriff Daniels nodded slowly. Well, we don't want any trouble in this town. Had our fill of that, you understand. Yes, sir, no trouble from me. The sheriff seemed satisfied for now. He tipped his hat to Lillian. Those supplies for the schoolhouse come in yet? Tomorrow's stage, she replied. I'll send word. After the sheriff left, an uncomfortable silence settled between Vincent and Lillian. Finally, he gathered his purchases. I should find lodging before that storm hits, he said. Lillian nodded. Miner's Rest at the end of the street is decent. Tell Widow Jensen I sent you. Vincent stepped toward the door, then paused. Thank you for the assistance. A small smile touched Lillian's lips. Everybody needs a steady hand sometimes, Mr. Porter. As Vincent stepped back into the afternoon sun, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a glimmer of possibility. His hands still shook, but for a moment, they had been steady in hers. The Miner's Rest was a modest two-story building with clean windows and a freshly painted sign. The Widow Jensen, a plump woman with kind eyes, showed him to a small but tidy room on the second floor. Breakfast at 7, she informed him. No rowdiness, no women in the rooms, no exceptions. Yes, madam, Vincent replied, placing his saddlebags on the bed. That hand trouble giving you fits long? She asked bluntly, nodding toward his fingers. Vincent stiffened. Since Gettysburg. Understanding dawned in her eyes. My Henry was at Chancellorsville, never came home. She adjusted her apron. Well, Mr. Porter, dinner's at 6 if you're interested. Left alone, Vincent unpacked his meager belongings, a change of clothes, a battered copy of the Odyssey, a revolver that he kept cleaned and loaded, and a small wooden box containing his most precious possessions. His mother's cameo, his father's pocket watch, and a folded letter he never read but couldn't bear to destroy. After washing away the dust from the trail, Vincent headed for the livery stable. The storm clouds were gathering faster now, turning the late afternoon light an eerie yellow-gray. The smell of rain hung heavy in the air as he approached the weathered building at the edge of town. Inside, he found an old man cursing colorfully at a chestnut mare who was having none of his attempts to bridle her. Stand still, you contrary beast, the man growled, his white beard quivering with indignation. Try approaching from her left side, Vincent suggested from the doorway. She's favoring her right front hoof, probably tender. The old man turned, squinting at Vincent. And who might you be, offering advice in my own stable? Vincent Porter. Heard you might need help with the horses. The old man, MacGregor, Vincent presumed studied him for a long moment. Heard from who? Miss O'Hara at the general store. This seemed to satisfy MacGregor. Lily's got a good head on her shoulders. He nodded toward the mare. If you're so smart, you try it. Vincent approached slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. His hands shook as he reached for the bridle, but his voice remained steady. The mare regarded him warily but didn't pull away. Vincent let her sniff his hand before gently checking her hoof, revealing a small stone wedged in the frog. Here's your problem, he said, carefully removing it. MacGregor watched with grudging respect as Vincent completed the bridling without further issue. Where you learn horses, grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania, then cavalry during the war. Ah, MacGregor said, his eyes dropping to Vincent's trembling hands. That explains it. Vincent tensed, waiting for questions he didn't want to answer or judgment he'd grown accustomed to facing. Instead, MacGregor simply said, Could use a man who knows horses. Pays not much, but there's a room in the loft if you want it. I've taken a room at the Miner's Rest for now. Suit yourself. Start tomorrow at dawn if you're interested. Before Vincent could respond, the stable doors burst open and a man staggered in, his face pale beneath a layer of trail dust. "MacGregor," he gasped. "Stage was hit, 5 miles south of town." The old man straightened. "Casualties. Drivers dead, 2 passengers wounded. They're bringing them in now." "Damn road agents," MacGregor growled. He turned to Vincent. "Looks like you're starting today. Hitch up the wagon, we'll need to meet them." Vincent moved without hesitation, his hands remarkably steady in the face of crisis. Years of military discipline took over as he hitched 2 sturdy draft horses to the wagon, while MacGregor gathered blankets and a canteen. They rode out as the first fat raindrops began to fall, the wind picking up and sending dust devils swirling across the road. About a mile outside town, they met the grim procession, 2 riders leading horses bearing makeshift stretchers, a third man on horseback clutching his arm, blood seeping through his fingers. Vincent helped transfer the wounded to the wagon. One was an elderly gentleman with a bullet wound to his leg. The other was a young woman, unconscious, with a gash across her forehead. The third wounded passenger, a banker from Sacramento, according to his companion, insisted he could ride into town. As they made their way back to Bodie, the storm broke in earnest. Rain hammered down, turning the road to mud and making the horses strain against the suddenly heavy wagon. Vincent drove with firm, deliberate motions, compensating for his trembling hands with sheer determination. The town doctor, a harried-looking man named Edwards, was waiting when they arrived. "Bring them to the surgery," he directed, leading the way to a small building next to the barber shop. Vincent carried the unconscious woman, her weight slight, in his arms, while MacGregor and another man helped the elderly gentleman. Inside, the doctor's wife, a stern-faced woman with capable hands, immediately began preparing bandages and hot water. "Put her there," she instructed Vincent, indicating a narrow examination table. As Vincent laid the woman down, the door burst open again, admitting Sheriff Daniels and, to Vincent's surprise, Lillian O'Hara, her cloak soaked through and her hair plastered to her forehead. "I came as soon as I heard," Lillian said, moving immediately to assist Mrs. Edwards. She glanced at Vincent, something like approval in her eyes. "You work quickly, Mr. Porter." "Just happened to be in the right place," he replied, suddenly aware of how close they were standing in the cramped surgery. "Any sign of the road agents?" the sheriff asked, addressing the room at large. "Gone with the strong box and mail pouch," answered one of the men who had brought in the wounded. "Storm wiped out any tracks," the sheriff swore under his breath. "Third holdup in 2 months. They're getting bolder." While the doctor tended to the wounded, Lillian organized the volunteers. She assigned tasks with quiet authority, sending some for fresh water, others to notify families, and a boy to the telegraph office to send messages to Sacramento. Vincent found himself working alongside her, holding bandages, fetching supplies, doing whatever was needed. His hands still trembled, but the urgency of the situation made it matter less. Whenever their eyes met, Lillian gave him a small nod as if to say, "You're doing fine." As night fell, the crisis subsided. The elderly gentleman, a judge traveling to hear cases in Bodie, was resting comfortably. The young woman, the judge's niece, they learned had regained consciousness and was sleeping under the watchful eye of Mrs. Edwards. The banker had been treated and released to the hotel. "You should get some rest," Lillian said to Vincent as they stepped out into the rain-washed night. The storm had passed, leaving the air cool and clean. "It's been a long day for your first in Bodie." Vincent nodded, suddenly aware of the exhaustion weighing on him. "You as well." "I live above the store," she said, gesturing toward the building down the street. "Not far." They walked together in comfortable silence, their boots splashing through puddles that reflected the newly emerged stars. When they reached the general store, Lillian paused. "You did good work today, Mr. Porter." "Vincent," he corrected gently. "And thank you, but I didn't do much." "You were there when needed. That's more than many can say." She studied him for a moment. "Your hands, they were steadier during the emergency." Vincent looked down at his fingers, which had resumed their familiar tremor now that the crisis had passed. "It comes and goes, worse when I'm thinking too much." Lillian nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Well, good night, Vincent. I imagine MacGregor will work you hard tomorrow." "Good night, Miss O'Hara." "Lillian," she countered with a small smile, "if we're to be friends." As Vincent walked back to his lodgings, he reflected on the strange turn his first day in Bodie had taken. He had come seeking anonymity, a quiet place to exist with his demons. Instead, he found himself already entangled in the town's affairs and, more surprisingly, forming connections he hadn't sought or expected. That night, for the first time in months, Vincent slept without nightmares. The following weeks established a rhythm to Vincent's days. He rose before dawn to help MacGregor with the morning feeding and mucking out stalls. The work was physically demanding but straightforward, allowing Vincent to lose himself in tasks that required focus but not precision. MacGregor proved to be a gruff but fair employer. He asked few questions about Vincent's past, and seemed untroubled by his assistant's shaking hands, especially after observing how the horses responded to Vincent's calm demeanor. "Never seen Diablo take to someone so quick," MacGregor commented one morning as Vincent groomed a temperamental stallion that had previously allowed only the old stableman near him. "You've got the touch, trembles and all." Vincent didn't respond, but a warmth spread through his chest at the simple acceptance. His evenings often found him at the general store, ostensibly to purchase small items. He needed a new shirt, tobacco for his pipe, ammunition, but increasingly to enjoy Lillian's company. Their conversations, hesitant at first, grew more comfortable with each visit. He learned that she had come to Bodie as a child when her father, fleeing the memory of his wife's death, had sought a new start in the goldfields. The strike he dreamed of never materialized, but he'd built a respectable business with the general store. Lillian had been running it alone since his passing 8 months earlier. "Don't you find it lonely?" Vincent asked one evening as he helped her inventory a new shipment of goods. Lillian considered the question as she marked figures in her ledger, her penmanship neat and precise. "Sometimes. But I know everyone in town and they depend on me. That matters." "You never thought of selling up, going somewhere?" Gentler, she smiled at that. "Like where?" "Back east with all those proper ladies and their proper manners." "No thank you. I prefer to be useful." She glanced up at him. "What about you?" "Bodie's hardly a retreat for gentle souls." Vincent carefully counted nails into small paper bags, buying time before answering. "After the war, I couldn't settle. Tried going home, but Pennsylvania wasn't home anymore, or maybe I wasn't me anymore." He flexed his trembling fingers. "Drifted west. Figured I'd keep going until I found somewhere I could be. Not better, but useful, like you said." Lillian nodded, accepting his partial truth without pressing for more. "And is Bodie that place?" Vincent met her eyes, starting to think it might be. Their growing friendship didn't go unnoticed in the small town. Widow Jensen gave him knowing looks at breakfast. MacGregor made increasingly unsubtle comments about settling down before my bones are too old to dance at the wedding. Even Sheriff Daniels, initially suspicious of the newcomer, had warmed slightly, particularly after Vincent helped capture a horse thief who'd stolen one of MacGregor's prized animals. "You've got good instincts," the sheriff had commented after they'd brought the thief in. "Ever consider wearing a badge?" Vincent had declined quickly, too quickly perhaps, as it sparked curiosity in the lawman's eyes. "Seems to me a man who tracks like you, handles a gun like you do despite those hands, might have worn a badge before. Or maybe something else." "Just experience," Vincent had answered evasively. "Nothing special." The sheriff didn't pursue it further, but Vincent sensed he hadn't heard the last of such questions. As summer progressed into autumn, bringing cooler nights and spectacular sunsets over the Sierra Nevada, Vincent found himself drawn more deeply into the community. He joined the volunteer fire brigade, attended the occasional town social, and even reluctantly agreed to help train a youth militia after Comanche activity was reported to the south. It was at the Founders' Day picnic in September that things shifted between him and Lillian. The town had gathered at a meadow on the outskirts, with tables laden with food, fiddle music filling the air, and children racing through the grass flying homemade kites. Vincent stood apart, watching the festivities with a small smile. He'd come a long way from the hollow-eyed drifter who'd ridden into town months before, but large gatherings still made him uneasy. His hands, though marginally improved with regular work and less whiskey, shook noticeably as he lifted a cup of cider to his lips. "You look like a man plotting escape routes," Lillian's voice came from beside him, tinged with amusement. Vincent turned to find her looking particularly lovely in a green dress he hadn't seen before, her copper hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual practical bun. "Force of habit," he admitted. "You look different, a good different or concerning different," she asked, her eyebrow arching. "Good," he said quickly. "Very good." A pleased flush colored her cheeks. "Thank you, it was my mother's. Seemed wasteful to let it sit in a trunk forever." She nodded toward the dancers forming sets for a Virginia reel. "Do you dance, Vincent?" He stared at his trembling hands. "Not anymore." Something in his tone must have revealed more than he intended because Lillian's expression softened. "Would you walk with me instead? It's a beautiful evening." They strolled away from the crowd, following a path that led along a small creek. The setting sun painted the landscape in gold and amber, catching in Lillian's hair and making it appear aflame. "I used to come here as a girl," she told him, stopping at a bend in the creek where a large boulder provided a natural seat. "Father would be working and I'd escape to read my books." Vincent settled beside her, careful to maintain a proper distance. "What did you read?" "Everything I could get my hands on. Adventure stories mostly. Robinson Crusoe, The Three Musketeers." She smiled at the memory. "Father thought it improper, said I should read improving literature for young ladies, but the stagecoach drivers would smuggle me penny dreadfuls." Vincent laughed, a rusty sound he barely recognized as his own. "I can imagine you as a girl, hair wild, lost in some tale of pirates or knights." "And what about you? What kind of boy were you, Vincent Porter?" The question sobered him. "Ordinary, I suppose, farm boy. Loved horses from the start. Had my head filled with notions of honor and duty." His mouth twisted. "Enough to make me enlist the day after Fort Sumter fell." Lillian was quiet for a moment, watching the water gurgle over smooth stones. "Is that when it happened? Your hands?" Vincent had been expecting the question eventually. Still, he had to steady his breathing before answering. "Gettysburg, July 1863. My regiment was positioned near Little Round Top." He paused, memories washing over him like the creek water over stones. "We held that hill against 5 Confederate charges. By the 3rd, I was the ranking officer, left a 22-year-old lieutenant commanding men twice my age." He looked down at his hands, flexing them as if they belonged to someone else. "After, they called it heroic, gave me a commendation. But all I remember is the noise so loud you couldn't hear orders, couldn't hear men screaming beside you, And the smell. He shook his head. When it was over, I couldn't stop shaking. Doctors called it soldier's heart, said it would pass. But it didn't, Lillian said softly. It got worse. I couldn't hold a pen to write reports, couldn't aim a pistol. Some days I couldn't even button my own uniform. His voice dropped. They discharged me, honorable but still. I was damaged goods. Lillian's hand covered his, warm and steady. You survived, Vincent. That's not damage, that's endurance. He looked up, meeting her eyes, finding no pity there, only understanding and something deeper that made his heart hammer in his chest. There are nights I still hear the guns, he admitted. Still smell the smoke. I know, she said simply. And somehow he believed she did. Not because she had experienced the same horrors, but because she saw him, truly saw him beyond his broken pieces. Before he could think better of it, Vincent leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, hesitant, a question more than a declaration. For one terrible moment, he thought he had misread everything. But then Lillian's hand came up to cradle his jaw, and she was kissing him back with a certainty that anchored him. When they parted, the last light of day was fading, painting the world in soft blues and purples. Vincent's hands trembled as they framed her face, but neither of them mentioned it. I didn't come to Bodie looking for this, he whispered. Lillian smiled, her eyes bright in the gathering dusk. The best things are rarely what we're looking for. They returned to the picnic holding hands, their entwined fingers a statement that didn't go unnoticed. MacGregor raised his glass in their direction, his weathered face split in a wide grin. Widow Jensen nodded approvingly. Sheriff Daniels gave a surprised lift of his eyebrows before tipping his hat to them. That night, walking Lillian to her door above the store, Vincent felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. When he kissed her goodnight, his hands shook as they always did, but it mattered less now. Tomorrow, he asked, reluctant to leave. Tomorrow, she confirmed. And all the days after, if you want. As Vincent made his way back to his room at the Miner's Rest, he marveled at how much had changed in the month since he'd ridden into Bodie. He had come seeking anonymity and found belonging instead. His demons weren't banished, they might never be, but they seemed less powerful now, less defining. For the first time in years, Vincent Porter dared to hope for a future beyond mere survival. The peaceful rhythm of Vincent's new life was shattered 3 weeks later when a telegram arrived for Sheriff Daniels. Vincent was shoeing a mare outside the livery when he saw the sheriff and his deputy hurrying toward the stables, their expressions grim. MacGregor around. Daniels asked without preamble. Supply run to Carson City, Vincent answered, setting down his tools. Won't be back until tomorrow. Something wrong. The sheriff hesitated, then handed Vincent a piece of paper. Telegram from the U.S. Marshal's office in Sacramento. Thought MacGregor should see it, but maybe you need to first. Vincent wiped his hands on a rag before accepting the telegram, his stomach nodding as he read. Information received. Stop William Blackwell, aka the ghost riding with Mulligan gang stop, believed heading toward mining communities. Eastern Sierra stop, extremely dangerous stop, wanted for murder of 3 lawmen. Stop. Vincent's blood ran cold. William Blackwell, a name he hadn't heard in years but one that featured prominently in his nightmares. Means something to you? Sheriff Daniels asked quietly. Vincent handed the telegram back, his face carefully blank. Should it? The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Most men don't go pale as a sheet reading about outlaws unless there's history there. Vincent turned back to the mare, picking up a hoof pick with fingers that shook more violently than usual. Lots of ghosts in these parts, none of them mine. Porter, the sheriff said, his voice hardening. I've given you space since you came to town. Figured a man's entitled to his privacy. But if there's something I should know about this Blackwell character, something that might endanger my town, I need to hear it. Now. Vincent straightened, meeting the lawman's gaze. I knew him. During the war. After he was, not right. Even before Gettysburg broke something in him. And we served together, that's all. The sheriff didn't look convinced. This telegram says he's killed lawmen. That suggests a particular grudge. Vincent's jaw tightened. William Blackwell has grudges against the whole world, Sheriff. Don't take it personal. I'll decide what to take personal, Daniels retorted. What I want to know is, if he comes to Bodie, will he have business with you? The question hung in the air between them. Vincent considered lying but recognized the futility. If Blackwell was indeed heading this way, the truth would emerge one way or another. Possibly, he finally admitted. We parted on bad terms. How bad? Vincent's hand unconsciously moved to his side, where a thin scar ran along his ribs, a permanent reminder of Blackwell's parting gift. Bad enough. The sheriff absorbed this, his expression unreadable. I'm going to need the full story, Porter. Not here. My office, 1 hour. After the sheriff left, Vincent finished with the mayor, his movements mechanical as his mind raced. William Blackwell. The ghost. A man Vincent had once called friend, then brother in arms, and finally enemy. A man Vincent had hoped was dead. Instead of heading directly to the sheriff's office, Vincent found himself walking toward the general store. He needed to see Lillian first to explain what exactly. That he had omitted significant parts of his past. That danger might be riding toward Bodie because of him. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. Lillian looked up from helping Mrs. Peterson select fabric, her face brightening at the sight of him. The expression faded quickly as she registered his demeanor. Mrs. Peterson, would you excuse me for a moment? Lillian said, already moving toward Vincent. Please feel free to look through the pattern book while you decide. She led Vincent to the back room, concern evident in her eyes. What's happened? I need to tell you something, he said, the words feeling inadequate. About my past. Before I tell the sheriff. Understanding dawned in her expression. The telegram, about that outlaw gang, news traveled fast in Bodie. Yes, one of them. I knew him. Served with him. Lillian waited, giving him space to continue at his own pace. Vincent took a deep breath. After I was discharged, I drifted. The tremors were bad, worse than now. Couldn't hold a job, couldn't function some days. Found myself in Denver with empty pockets and fewer prospects. That's where I ran into William Blackwell. We'd served together. He offered me work. He paused, the shame of what came next still bitter on his tongue. I didn't ask many questions. Should have, but I was desperate. Turns out he'd formed a gang targeting Union payroll shipments, had a network of former soldiers feeding him information. You rode with them? Lillian asked, her voice carefully neutral. 3 months, Vincent admitted. Never killed anyone, but I didn't stop it either. Stood lookout. Drove getaway wagons. Told myself it was just money that the government owed us anyway. He couldn't meet her eyes now. Then Blackwell changed the targets. Started hitting civilian banks, stagecoaches. People got hurt. When I objected, he laughed. Said I was still playing soldier while the world moved on. Vincent's hand unconsciously went to his side again. I tried to leave. He took exception to that. Left me for dead outside Laramie. By the time I recovered, I'd heard he'd been killed in a shootout with marshals in Utah Territory. But he wasn't, Lillian concluded. No, and now he's heading this way with the Mulligan gang. Vincent finally looked at her. Lillian, if he recognizes me. He holds grudges, and he's dangerous in ways you can't imagine. So what will you do? The simplest answer would be to leave, to ride out of Bodie and draw any potential danger away from the town and, more importantly, away from her. It would be the responsible choice, the selfless one. But looking at Lillian now, Vincent knew he couldn't do it. Not unless she asked him to go. I'm going to tell Sheriff Daniels everything, then help him prepare if he'll let me. Lillian studied him for a long moment. You're afraid I'll think differently of you now. It wasn't a question, but Vincent nodded anyway. Vincent Porter, she said, stepping closer and taking his trembling hands in hers. I fell in love with a man who shakes when he pours coffee but is steady as a rock in a crisis. Who talks to horses more gently than most men talk to women. Who carries burdens no one should have to bear. She squeezed his hands. Your past is part of you, but it isn't all of you. The tightness in Vincent's chest eased slightly at her words. I should have told you sooner. Yes, you should have, she agreed, but I understand why you didn't. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Go talk to the sheriff, tell him everything, then come back to me. Vincent covered her hand with his. I will. An hour later, Vincent sat across from Sheriff Daniels in the jail office, recounting the full story of his association with William Blackwell. The sheriff listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. So you're telling me this Blackwell fellow has a personal vendetta against you, and now he might be bringing it to my town, Daniels summarized when Vincent finished. I'm telling you it's possible, Vincent corrected. I don't know if he's heard I'm here. Don't even know for certain Bodie is their destination. But if the gang is hitting mining communities in the Eastern Sierra, we're an obvious target. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, studying Vincent. You're not the first man to come to Bodie looking for a fresh start. Hell, half this town is running from something. He tapped his fingers on the desk. But I can't have a gang of killers riding in here because of unfinished business. I understand, Vincent said quietly. If you want me to leave, did I say that? The sheriff interrupted. No, what I want is your help. You know Blackwell, how he thinks, how he operates. That's valuable. Vincent blinked in surprise. You're not running me out of town, Sheriff Daniels snorted. Son, I've been watching you these past months. You work hard, keep to yourself mostly, aside from your obvious feelings for Miss O'Hara. You've helped this community when needed. That counts for something. He leaned forward. Besides, if Blackwell is as dangerous as you say, having someone who knows his methods might make the difference between a successful defense and a massacre. Relief washed through Vincent. What do you need from me? First, any intelligence on how Blackwell plans his attacks. Second, I'm deputizing you, effective immediately. Vincent started to protest, but the sheriff held up a hand. This isn't negotiable, Porter. I've got one full-time deputy and a handful of volunteers who can barely hit the broad side of a barn. I need someone who can handle himself in a firefight. My hands didn't seem to hamper you much when you helped take down that horse thief. The sheriff pulled open a drawer and removed a deputy's badge. Besides, I've been watching. They're steadier than when you first rode in. Vincent couldn't deny it. While the tremors hadn't disappeared, they had indeed lessened in both frequency and severity over the months of regular work, better sleep, and he had to admit Lillian's calming presence. I won't force you, Daniel said, placing the badge on the desk between them. But I'm asking, for the town, for Miss O'Hara. Vincent stared at the badge, memories of another time he'd accepted such responsibility flooding back. But this was different. This wasn't about abstract notions of duty or country. This was about protecting a community that had given him a second chance, about protecting the woman he loved. He reached for the badge, his hand steady as he pinned it to his vest. Deputy Porter, Sheriff Daniels said with a satisfied nod. Now let's talk strategy. The next few days were a flurry of activity, as Bodie prepared for a potential attack. Vincent provided detailed information about Blackwell's typical methods, how he preferred to strike at dusk when visibility was compromised, how he always had men positioned on high ground for covering fire, how he studied targets for days before moving. Sheriff Daniels organized the town's defense accordingly. Extra men were posted on the approaches to town. The bank and assay office doubled their guards. A system of warning bells was established. Shopkeepers were advised to close early and secure their valuables. Families living on outlying farms and ranches were encouraged to stay in town until the threat passed. Through it all, Vincent found himself the center of attention in a way that would have been unbearable months before. People looked to him for guidance, asked his opinion, followed his instructions. His past association with Blackwell, rather than making him suspect, seemed to validate his expertise in the town's eyes. Most surprisingly, his hands remained relatively steady despite the stress. The tremors were still present, especially in the mornings or when he was tired, but they no longer dominated his existence as they once had. "It's because you have purpose now," Lillian told him as they sat on the porch behind her store, watching the sunset paint the mountains in fiery hues. "Something beyond yourself to focus on." Vincent considered this. Maybe it's because I have something worth being steady for." Lillian smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Either way, I'm proud of you." 5 days after the telegram arrived, with no sign of the Mulligan gang, the town began to relax its vigilance. Some suggested the outlaws had changed course, perhaps deterred by reports of Bodie's preparations or attracted to easier targets elsewhere. Vincent wasn't convinced. "Blackwell is patient," he warned the sheriff. "He'll wait until we lower our guard." But as another day passed uneventfully, even Vincent began to hope the danger might have passed them by. That evening, he closed up the livery early. Mac Gregor had finally accepted Vincent's offer to buy into the business and headed to the general store to walk Lillian home. He found her tallying the day's receipts, her head bent over the ledger, a pencil tucked behind her ear. The sight of her, so focused and competent, filled him with a warmth that still surprised him after all these months. "Busy day?" he asked, removing his hat as he approached the counter. Lillian looked up, her face brightening. "The usual, Mrs." Henderson couldn't decide between calico or gingham for nearly an hour. Mr. Donovan tried to haggle over tobacco prices again. She closed the ledger. "How about you? Any news?" "All quiet. Sheriff's considering scaling back the patrols tomorrow if nothing develops." Vincent ran a hand through his hair. "Starting to think we might have dodged this particular bullet." "That would be a welcome change," Lillian said, coming around the counter to greet him properly with a kiss. "Are you hungry? I was thinking we could have dinner at the hotel restaurant." "I'm too tired to cook." "Sounds perfect," Vincent agreed, offering her his arm. They had just stepped out onto the boardwalk when the sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the bank. Vincent instinctively pushed Lillian back inside, drawing his revolver in the same motion. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving toward the commotion. "Vincent," Lillian called after him, but he was already running down the street, his deputy's badge catching the last rays of sunlight. The scene at the bank was chaos. 3 masked men on horseback were firing into the air while 2 more emerged from the building, carrying heavy bags. Bodies lay on the boardwalk, the bank guard and one of the extra men the sheriff had posted. Vincent took cover behind a water trough, assessing the situation. The sheriff and his regular deputy were nowhere in sight, likely responding to another disturbance, which Vincent now realized was probably a diversion. One of the robbers spotted Vincent and fired in his direction, the bullet splintering wood inches from his head. Vincent returned fire, his shot going wide as his hands betrayed him at the critical moment. "Damn it," he muttered, steadying his wrist with his left hand for his next shot. This one found its mark, striking one of the mounted men in the shoulder and knocking him from his horse. The fallen outlaw scrambled for cover, still firing. Vincent ducked lower, reloading quickly despite his trembling fingers. When he looked up again, the remaining robbers had mounted and were galloping out of town, firing behind them to discourage pursuit. Vincent was about to follow when a familiar voice stopped him cold. "Been a long time, Vince." Vincent turned slowly to find William Blackwell standing in the shadows of an alley across the street. He looked different from when Vincent had last seen him, leaner, harder, with a jagged scar running from his left eye to his jaw. But the cold smile was the same. "William," Vincent acknowledged, keeping his revolver pointed at his former friend. Blackwell's eyes dropped to the deputy's badge on Vincent's chest, and he laughed a harsh, empty sound. "Well, isn't that rich? The man who couldn't keep his hands steady enough to pour whiskey is now a lawman." His own gun was aimed casually at Vincent's heart. "How's that working out for you?" "Better than being a murderer," Vincent replied evenly. "You don't have to do this, William. You've got the money. Take it and ride out." Blackwell's expression hardened. "You know it's not about the money, never was." He stepped forward into the fading light. "You left me for dead in Utah." "You tried to kill me first," Vincent reminded him. "Outside Laramie, remember? Because you were going to turn us in," Blackwell spat. "After everything we'd been through together, you were going to betray us to save your own skin." "I was trying to stop you before more people died," Vincent countered. "The war was over, William. What we were doing wasn't about justice anymore, it was just robbery and murder." Blackwell's finger tightened on the trigger. "Always so righteous, even with those shaking hands of yours. Tell me, do they still keep you up at night, the memories? The faces of the men you killed at Gettysburg?" Vincent flinched, and Blackwell smiled, knowing he'd struck a nerve. "That's what I thought. You're still the same broken soldier pretending to be whole." "We're all broken, William," Vincent said quietly. "The difference is I'm trying to put the pieces back together. You're just breaking more." For a moment, something like regret flickered across Blackwell's face. Then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. "Goodbye, Vince," he said, raising his pistol. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Vincent felt a searing pain in his left shoulder as his own bullet struck Blackwell in the chest. The outlaw looked surprised, glancing down at the spreading crimson stain on his shirt. "Didn't think you had it in you," he murmured before crumpling to the ground. Vincent staggered, his revolver suddenly too heavy to hold. He dropped to one knee, pressing his hand to his shoulder as warm blood seeped between his fingers. The world began to tilt, sounds becoming muffled as shock set in. Through the gathering darkness, he heard someone shouting his name. Then Lillian was there, her face pale with fear as she pressed a folded cloth against his wound. "Stay with me, Vincent," she commanded, her voice seeming to come from very far away. "Don't you dare leave me now." He tried to respond to tell her it wasn't that bad, but the words wouldn't form. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was Lillian's determined face above him, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer. Vincent drifted in and out of awareness, catching fragments of conversations around him, Dr. Edwards discussing blood loss, Sheriff Daniels recounting the coordinated attack on the bank and assay office, Lillian's voice steady as she refused to leave his side. When he finally regained full consciousness, he was in an unfamiliar bed in a small, neat room. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, casting patterns on a patchwork quilt that covered him to the waist. His shoulder throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, and his left arm was immobilized in a sling. "Welcome back." Vincent turned his head to find Lillian sitting in a chair beside the bed, a book open in her lap. She looked tired with shadows under her eyes, but her smile was radiant with relief. "How long?" he asked, his voice raspy from disuse. 3 days, she answered, setting aside her book and reaching for a glass of water. She helped him drink, supporting his head with a gentle hand. "The doctor was worried about fever, but you've been improving since yesterday." Vincent tried to sit up and winced as pain shot through his shoulder. "The others, Blackwell, dead," Lillian confirmed. "The sheriff says you got him clean through the heart, even with your injury." She hesitated. 3 of his men were killed in the firefight. 2 were captured trying to escape with the money. The rest got away. Vincent absorbed this information. And the town. 2 dead, the bank guard and one of the sheriff's volunteers. Several wounded, but all expected to recover. Lillian's fingers intertwined with his. "You were the worst of them." "Where am I?" he asked, looking around the unfamiliar room. "My home," Lillian answered. "Above the store. I wasn't about to let them put you in that drafty room at Widow Jensen's to recover." The implication of her words, that she had brought him into her private space, cared for him intimately, would have scandalized polite society. But Bodie wasn't polite society, and near death had a way of reordering priorities. "The doctor said you'll need several weeks of rest," Lillian continued. "But he expects a full recovery. The bullet went clean through, missed anything vital." Vincent squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry I frightened you." "You should be," she said, her voice suddenly thick with emotion. "Running toward gunfire like that, I thought," she broke off, taking a steadying breath. "I thought I was going to lose you before I even really had you." "You have me," Vincent assured her, "for as long as you want me." "I want forever," Lillian said simply. "Is that too much to ask?" Vincent looked at her, really looked at her. Hair escaping from its pins. Eyes tired but determined. Chin set in that stubborn angle he'd come to adore. In that moment, he saw their possible future stretching before him. Mornings waking beside her, building a business together, perhaps children with her copper hair and his love of horses. A life he had never imagined could be his. "Not too much at all," he answered. "In fact, I was planning to ask you the same thing, though I had intended to do it with a ring and without a bullet hole in my shoulder." Lillian laughed, tears brimming in her eyes. "Since when do we do anything the conventional way?" Fair point. Vincent shifted, ignoring the pain as he reached for her with his good arm. "Lillian O'Hara, will you marry me?" Trembling hands and all. "Yes," she said without hesitation, leaning forward to kiss him gently. Trembling hands and all. "After all, I promised to hold you steady, didn't I?" They were married 6 weeks later, after Vincent had healed enough to stand without assistance. The ceremony took place in the meadow by the creek where they had first kissed, with the aspen trees turned golden in the October sunlight. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which lasted well into the night with music, dancing, and more food than Vincent had seen in one place since before the war. Sheriff Daniels, who performed the ceremony in his capacity as Justice of the Peace, had a gift for them: Vincent's deputy badge, polished and mounted in a small wooden frame. "Figured you might want to keep this," he said, handing it to Vincent, "as a reminder of how you helped save this town." Vincent accepted it with a nod of gratitude. "Thank you, Sheriff, but I think my deputy days are behind me." Daniels grinned. "Fair enough. Heard you bought out Mac Gregor's share of the livery." "He's retiring to San Francisco to live with his daughter," Vincent confirmed. "Said he was tired of the cold winters." "Well, the town's loss is your gain," the sheriff said, tipping his hat to Lillian. "Though I reckon you got the better end of that bargain, Mrs. Porter." Lillian, radiant in a cream-colored dress with wildflowers in her hair, smiled up at Vincent. "I certainly think so." Later, as they danced under lantern light to a slow fiddle tune, Vincent held his wife close, his hands steady on her waist. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "Completely," she answered. "You?" Vincent considered the question. The tremors would likely never fully disappear. Some wounds didn't heal completely, but they had diminished to the point where most days he hardly noticed them. And on the days when they were worse, when the memories pressed too close and the nightmares returned, Lillian was there, holding him steady just as she'd promised. "More than I ever thought possible," he told her truthfully. "You saved me, you know." Lillian shook her head, her eyes serious as they met his. "No, Vincent, you saved yourself. I just reminded you that you were worth saving." As the years passed, Vincent and Lillian built a life together that neither could have imagined when he first rode into Bodie. The livery stable thrived under Vincent's knowledgeable care, expanding to include horse breeding and training. Lillian continued running the general store, adding a small lending library in the back room for the town's children. Their first child, a daughter they named Alina after Vincent's mother, arrived exactly a year after their wedding, a tiny, perfect being with Lillian's copper hair and Vincent's steady gaze. A son, James, followed 2 years later, and then another daughter, Margaret, 3 years after that. Vincent's hand still shook, though less with each passing year. The tremors became most noticeable when he was tired or during the occasional thunderstorm that reminded him too vividly of artillery fire. But he had learned to work around it, to compensate in ways that made the disability almost inconsequential. More importantly, he had learned to accept it as part of himself rather than a shameful weakness to be hidden. When his children asked about his shaky hands, he explained in simple terms that he had been in a war, and sometimes his body remembered being scared. Alina, with a child's innocent wisdom, suggested he think of happy things instead, like horses or her mother's apple pie. Vincent found the advice surprisingly effective. Bodie changed too, as mining towns inevitably do. The gold boom began to wane, and some families moved on to more promising locations. But a core community remained, including the Porters, who had put down roots too deep to easily transplant. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Vincent and Lillian returned to the creek where he had proposed, bringing a picnic lunch and a bottle of California wine. The children were with Mac Gregor, who had returned for a visit, and declared himself fit enough at 76 to wrangle 3 energetic young Porters for an afternoon. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't ridden into Bodie that day?" Lillian asked as they sat side by side on their familiar boulder, watching the creek's timeless journey over smooth stones. Vincent considered the question. "Sometimes I might have kept drifting, or settled somewhere else, found different work." He took her hand, his fingers entwining with hers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "But I wouldn't have found you, and that would have been the greatest loss of my life." Lillian leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder as it always had. "I used to think I was trapped here after Father died, that Bodie was a cage rather than a home." She smiled up at him. "I'm glad I stayed long enough for you to find me." "We found each other," Vincent corrected gently, "and we've been holding each other steady ever since." As the afternoon sun gilded the landscape in gold and amber, the same colors that had painted the day of their first kiss, Vincent Porter held his wife close and gave silent thanks for the twisted path that had led him to this moment. His hands were steady now, not because the tremors had vanished, but because he had learned that true strength came not from the absence of weakness, but from embracing it and moving forward anyway. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a summer storm building over the Sierra. Once, the sound would have sent him spiraling into memories of gunfire and death. Now it was simply weather, a natural part of life in this wild, beautiful place they called home. "We should head back," Lillian said, though she made no move to rise. "The children will be wearing poor Mac Gregor to a frazzle." Vincent nodded but lingered a moment longer, committing the scene to memory: the golden light, the burbling creek, the woman beside him who had taught him that even broken pieces could form a beautiful whole. "I love you," he said, the words simple but profound. Lillian smiled, the same smile that had first captured his heart a decade ago in a dusty general store. "I know," she replied. "I've always known." Hand in hand, they walked back toward town, toward their children, their business, their community, their future. The path was familiar now, worn smooth by years of shared journeys. Behind them, the creek continued its eternal song, witness to their story and countless others in this land of second chances. And if Vincent's hand trembled slightly in Lillian's grasp as the thunder drew closer, she simply held it more firmly, keeping her promise from all those years ago. "Then I'll hold you steady,"